Hello and welcome to the Shankly Gates podcast, the first of the 2021-22 season. My name's Dan. I'll be your host for tonight. I'm joined by Mark and Taryn. We're going to be looking back a little bit first on the pre-season. Obviously, today's game, the 1-1 draw with Atletico Bilbao. Looking ahead to obviously a game tomorrow as well, pre-season match, Norwich next weekend, and then the season more generally, really, and what we are hoping and expecting as the season goes forward. I'll come to you first, Taryn. First and foremost, how are we? Nice summer. And what do you make of the game today?
Yeah, all good. Excited. Enjoyed watching Liverpool play back at home as well. I think for me, I was quite underwhelmed. I think we had a good start, pressing wise in all the games in pre-season so far. We've looked really sharp in pressing, but I think final product was letting us down today, and it has quite a few times. But it was a good run out for the boys, and it's good to see Virgil van Dijk back and seeing players get minutes in their legs as well.
Yeah, definitely. Mark, you mentioned off air about pre-season not necessarily being a true reflection on what's to come, which I think is fair enough. So what have you made more generally about Liverpool's trip away in the pre-season? Obviously, Taryn mentions getting Virgil back. That's probably most important out of all of this. But yeah, what have you made of Liverpool's efforts in pre-season so far?
I think, Dan, what I really think is quite interesting about it is just sort of how they tend to line up. You sort of get an idea of maybe who's in pole position, maybe what system is likely to be used for the start of the season and that kind of thing. So the general performances, obviously there's a lot of training going on in between, actually even sometimes the day of games. So it's very hard to sort of put a barometer on that. But just generally, I think it does give us an insight into how they may line up and what we could expect, really, I suppose, not only just personnel-wise, but also in terms of the team tactics.
Yeah, definitely. There's been some tweaks in personnel, actually, it seems like. Certainly in the midfield. I know we've been without a few of the star names for various reasons. A lot of people coming back late from the Euros and what have you. So it seems like a good time to mention my favourite player from pre-season, Harvey Elliott, who has been playing in the advanced role in the midfield, really. And I've been properly impressed with him. He had a really good loan spell at Blackburn last season. And he's come back. And there's been some question as to whether he'd actually stay at Liverpool for the season. But for me, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind he's done enough. Taryn, what are your thoughts on who's impressed you more generally, but also Harvey Elliott?
I think, first of all, Harvey Elliott is one of Liverpool's biggest talents to come out of the academy. Obviously we've got Trent, but I think, in recent times, Harvey Elliott's just something special. I think we saw at Fulham, sort of tweaks and little moments where he was a star player. But I think now, especially in games last year in the Cup, and I think especially now in pre-season, he is just so talented and he is so bright. I think as well, the fact that he's playing in midfield, not in his preferred position, I'd say, and he's still managing to almost run the show sometimes and produce moments of quality. And I think sometimes in our midfield, we lack that sort of clinicality, I guess, in that final pass, that final sort of movement shimmy that you need to sort of create an opportunity. And I think he's brought that in pre-season. I think I found it more exciting when he moved into the front three towards the end of the game, and he was dancing through the defenders, and he had that one chance that hit the post. That's Harvey Elliott. That sort of, you watch that and you think, that's Mo Salah in its prime, you know what I mean? So the fact that he's in and around players like that and, learning day and day, more about himself, more skills, it's really exciting. I think overall, the player that's impressed me the most has got to be Kostas Tsimikas. I think early on you thought, he's just there to back up Robertson, but I think obviously with the injury today and, the performance he's putting in pre-season, he's a Robertson replica for me. And I think he's been absolutely class in pre-season. He's shown why, he's at Liverpool and why Klopp sort of wanted him in the team.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously he was signed, like I say, to be understudy to Robertson and never really got a look in for various reasons. I think injuries elsewhere probably hampered him because you couldn't throw all those kids into centre-back and have a pretty inexperienced left-back alongside him. So Robertson ended up playing pretty much every game. And that could be, it was a pretty freak incident that caused the injury. But obviously you've mentioned the Robertson injury. So Mark, how big a blow would it be to Liverpool if Robertson missed the first number of weeks of the season? And do you think, like Taryn, that Tsimikas is ready to step in?
I think it'd be a big blow down. Obviously, Robertson's been fantastic over a period of time. Not just going forwards. I know his numbers dropped off slightly last season, but also defensively, very rarely do you see him in bad positions or outstripped in 1v1s. So he's a very, very important player for Liverpool. So it will be a big blow. And you've got to believe that if it's any kind of ligament damage, he's going to be out for a prolonged period of time. You'd expect a minimum of a month, depending on the severity, what grade it would be. So... So, yeah, going back to your question, yeah, I think it's a big blow. Tsimikas, I couldn't tell you enough. I think we've got to see him over a more prolonged period of time. Obviously, I think he's made some positive strides in pre-season from some of the reports. And I think, obviously, Liverpool have scouted the player, and I know he was on originally sort of a shortlist for the role, and they obviously see that he's got transferable skills that would be suitable in terms of his profile to play left back for Liverpool. So I have no doubt that he'll have the skill set to be able to do it. I think it was difficult, the games he did play last season. They were few and far between. When he does come in, he's got no rhythm. And as I say, it was impossible, as you mentioned, for him to play any considered number of games with the changes in the back four and the inexperience. So, so it'd be interesting. One thing I did in the games that I have seen of him, what I found really interesting about him, he's a really two-footed player in the sense that he often travels, obviously, with his right foot as opposed to his left foot as well. It's pretty rare that you actually see that. I mean, people often throw out the terms, the two-footed, and it normally relates to actually striking of a ball, whether it be finishing. But he actually travels with both feet really well, and that was one of the things that stood out to me. But it's just really a matter of time. We've got to see him, and I think he'll get a run now, so we'll be able to judge him a bit better.
Yeah, it certainly looks like he's going to get a run. Klopp, after the game, essentially said it was impossible to tell right now, sort of the length or the severity of the injury. I think he's going for a scan tomorrow. There was positives in that Robertson got himself up, got himself off the pitch. I thought that was a relative positive to take from the situation. He looked a little bit annoyed, I suppose is the best way to call it, but he also didn't look too concerned. So hopefully it is only minor and it is only a number of weeks as opposed to months. Fingers crossed anyway. Back to today, I presume both you boys have seen the chaos that ensued away from the pitch before the match. Obviously, Liverpool have adopted NFC near-field communication for their tickets this year, as opposed to the actual cards for membership and season tickets. Taryn, I'll come to you. What do you make? Obviously, there's been teething problems. I'm actually going the game tomorrow, so I hope the teething problems have been well and truly ironed out by then, because I don't want to be stood at Arkle's 15 minutes before kickoff waiting to get in. But yeah, what do you make of the change in technology and what Liverpool are trying to do with it? And, can they get it right before the start of the season, I suppose?
Yeah, I think the problem is it's come at a very difficult time for Liverpool in terms of fans are so excited to come back into stadiums and to trial new technologies and a new system where fans are so eager to get into the stadium makes it really difficult to sort of do things in a systematic way, which I feel like, stewards, fans and sort of, officials want to do it. So the issue with that is you've got raving fans, excited to get into the stadium, but there's sort of a slower process, I imagine, to get in as well. So, again, like I said, it's come at a time where fans are so eager to get into stadiums, but it's a different method, different way to get in. And like you said, you don't want to be waiting outside the stadium for too long. And obviously that to delay the kickoff as well. And I think the issue is if that comes in a Premier League game or if it comes in a big clash, the team and the club will struggle at the same time. They could be fined, there could be issues as well. So you can only hope that it's organised and arranged well before, the season starts or, within the early days. But at the same time, we're in a time where things are so exciting, I believe, for everybody. So, we've had the freestanding sort of section of Anfield. We've got fans, back as well. So it's at a time where everyone's so excited. So trialing new stuff is always going to have teething problems, but you just got to hope that it gets sorted very early on.
Yeah, and, perhaps fortunate Liverpool have got a couple of bites of the cherry, because obviously we've got a game tomorrow night where they could potentially find more problems and fix more problems, hopefully. And obviously we're away first Premier League game of the season, so we've got that little bit of extra time to get things sorted. Mark, on fans coming back generally at Liverpool, we spoke about it quite a lot last year in terms of the negative effect it had. It's hard to quantify it, but just how big a positive do you think fans coming back will have on this Liverpool side?
Yeah, I think it does. I think obviously you seen the team who fared the best without fans, and that was Manchester City. Very much a team who control every aspect of a football match, really, with and without the ball. Where Liverpool play a much, well, not a much different style, but because Liverpool still dominate the ball for the majority of games, but a lot of especially in the bigger games against the better opposition, in which Liverpool are hunting down the ball and looking to win it as high as they possibly can. Not as controlled as Manchester City in terms of having as much possession. I think they really feed into that fan atmosphere, and it does drive the team on. And you can see the difference, obviously, in the results. I know you can point to the fact that Liverpool had numerous injury problems last season, but you can definitely factor into that intimidation and that sort of intensity and level of performance that they can garner from the fans having a negative effect not being there, really. So I think in terms of the style of play, I think it probably affected Liverpool more than it would, say, a Manchester City.
Yeah, it's difficult to agree with that. And I know it's something Klopp's kind of alluded to in the past. There's a talk of the sort of mythical 12th man, but it's definitely something that Klopp likes to play into. And it's something that's, treated Liverpool well in the past. We've got a comment here about the Vale seats, Tavern, that you mentioned. So what do you make of the Vale seats? Do you think they're a good addition? Do you think they can help improve the atmosphere? What's your thoughts on them?
I think it brings back the sort of olden vibe to football, the sort of raw, rustic vibe to football. And I think, in a time where so much is changing, like I've mentioned, it's nice to see football going back to its old ways. And I think if it works and if it's safe, I think it'd be nice to see more stadiums and more clubs sort of adopt it. But yeah, it's a positive addition, and it's something fresh and new, whilst also sort of paying homage to the old days.
Yeah, definitely. Just going to round off the pre-season section now, if you like. I know, Mark, you said that results are immaterial during this period, which I completely agree with. There's a lot of substitutes, a lot of trialing out different players and different systems, a lot of different things going on. But if you had to sort of take away a major positive from this pre-season, what would it be for you?
Yeah, I think first of all, Dan, towards obviously the back end of pre-season, I think that's when, you do want to have that sort of confidence of a few results, and more than that, really, really good performances, I think, because I think Liverpool have been underwhelming for a period of time. Now, obviously, talked about before an asterisk in terms of they have had injuries, but the idea that Liverpool were just going to pick up and get back to the form they were, many months prior, even the season before, was fanciful, I think, really. I think it's going to be a process, and I think it'd be, pretty naive to think that, they're just going to slip back into gear. So I think it is important in terms of the level of performance. And I think, as you touched on before, Dan, I think, Harvey Elliott coming into the side, it looks like Shaqiri, well, it doesn't look like it. Obviously the player wants a move. And I think in terms of profile in Liverpool's squad, they would have had to fill that void. And Harvey Elliott's very similar player, plays off the right-hand side, comes inside onto his left foot, and is a player who would, obviously he's a young player who hasn't physically developed enough to maybe play on the sides of Liverpool's attack where they're looking to stretch playing behind. So, find a position for him in midfield, and he can pick out a pass, and he's a clever player in between pockets of space in there. And I think if he's an option for Liverpool, because obviously I don't think I'd be very surprised if he played the first game of the season. I really would, despite him starting in pre-season. However, if he can be an option, especially if Shaqiri is going to be sold for Liverpool this season, then I think that'd be really, really important. And I know you could point to the fact that, okay, Shaqiri hasn't played that many minutes, but Liverpool do miss the kinds of player who can find a pass in the final third and a little bit of ingenuity. And, Liverpool have a lot of runners, players who like to threaten direct into the penalty area. But when they've needed that little bit of craft, they haven't always had it. And that's where Shaqiri's coming in the past. So if Elliott can provide that option, I think that would be a really positive thing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And he certainly looks capable, in my opinion. But I'm currently running the Harvey Elliott fan club, so there's no surprise. No surprise there whatsoever. Tavern, I will ask you a similar question. Obviously, you mentioned Tsimikas. We mentioned injuries and the returning players, and obviously we've had a glowing reference for Harvey Elliott. So if you had to pick a standout sort of either moment or person to emerge from this pre-season, who would you go with?
I think for me, he's a player that's been there for a while, but he's got a lot to prove, and that's Naby Keita. with him, he's got so much quality and ability, and we've known for such a long time that he could be the player to sort of fill that void, that Mark's talking about in that midfield, and we haven't seen it enough. When he comes in, he can create, he can score goals, he propels the midfield forward, but we haven't seen that enough. And he's obviously had quite a few injury problems. I think as well, the fact that he took the number 8 shirt added a lot more pressure to him and sort of his profile in the club. But I think this pre-season, he's just been immense for me, and it hurts in the way that you're concerned that he's not going to live up to that, and it's sort of, oh, he'll have another chance next year. But I think for me, there's a lot of players in that team, maybe Ox as well, you could add into that category, where they've come to this club, they've done well in certain moments, but they need to prove that they're worthy to stay at the club for the foreseeable future. Because I think if not, the next season, they'll be looking for a different club and there won't be Liverpool players anymore. But I think Naby Keita has been, a shining star in pre-season. I hope it continues for the rest of the season as well.
Yeah, again, I completely agree. I think we're almost reticent to say it with Keita because we've seen it before in little glimpses, and then it ends up falling on its sword, if you like, and he gets injured, or let's all hope that he can stay fit and it actually works out for him this time, because there's definitely a player in there somewhere. For me, it'd probably be all the ones we mentioned, and probably Sadio Mane. I think he's looked a lot sharper than he did at any point last season. Really been impressed. Obviously, added a couple of goals along the way, but I think he's been sensational throughout pre-season, so he'd probably be my pick. Moving on, before we go on to the actual season itself, obviously we're amidst a transfer window, believe it or not, as Liverpool fans. We are currently in a transfer window. We kind of spoke off air about clubs doing a lot of good business, and certainly business. So, Mark, I'll come back to you. Obviously, we brought in Konate, probably the most important one, given what went on last season. But with 3 weeks to go in the season and a week before the actual season kicks off, how do you rate Liverpool's transfer window so far, and what do we need to do before it closes?
I think first of all, Dan, it was important that they got a centre-half in. I think, and a centre-half of the profile who really could play for Liverpool, because I think Phillips did fantastic last season when he came in. I can't knock anything he did. However, the profile and the skill set that you need really to play for Liverpool in that centre-half position and defend in isolation, 1v1s, start in a higher position up the field of play. And you could see that from when Klopp obviously spoke in the media as well. You could see it wasn't the ideal scenario. So fantastic that both he and Reece Williams got Liverpool over the line last season, but it was obvious that they needed somebody to come in, especially with the injuries to Gomez, Matip and Van Dijk. I mean, you just don't know them players are going to come back, and you hope for the best. But in terms of Gomez and Matip, that they are always likely to pick up more injuries, and therefore you need that fourth choice. So that was important. I think in terms of what Liverpool required, I think it's been the same for a long period of time now, is a player in between the midfield to the attack who can potentially play in both roles, who brings something different than the current sort of incumbents in the position we have. So if you think of Liverpool's side, as I say, very vertical players who like to attack space in behind, dribble with the ball, and are very direct in the sense that Jota, Salah, Mane, these kind of players. However, since Coutinho's left the club, Liverpool have lacked that little bit of, like I talked about before, that ingenuity, that ability to find a pass, that ability to find moving targets and combine midfield to attack. And I think they still do, regardless of the success they've had. And I think that kind of player, like Coutinho, who could operate in the front three, off the left-hand side, tucked in and combine in that midfield to attack, or can actually also operate in the midfield three when you're playing against the lesser opposition and you potentially want to get more attacking players on the field to play and feed the forward players. So I think that kind of player would be ideal. And the one player that I would like to see more than anything else, because I think Liverpool's rivals have got a host of these kind of players. When you think about, De Bruyne, obviously Grealish has gone there now. You think about Bernardo Silva, Mahrez, these players who can find a pass. I'm just talking about Manchester City there as an example. But it is an area in which Liverpool lack. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, he's had his injury problems, but in the state that Barcelona are in, maybe go back and ask what the situation is. He's had a lot of injuries, Coutinho, And I understand that. But that kind of profile, if it isn't to be him, someone along them lines, I think would be the ideal for me.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say Coutinho before you said it then, and I was dying inside just a little bit. But I agree with everything you've said at the same time, because I think, although we kind of shied away from that number 10 ever since he left, right now there's definitely a space for one, whether it be him or not. I think his injury problems, which you allude to, might be probably the biggest reason we wouldn't go back for him right now. I think they've been quite serious. Certainly last season. Go on.
I was just going to say, Dan, I think I totally agree with you. I think the thing is about Coutinho is he hasn't played enough football, and it's hard to know what level he's currently at in terms of the injuries.
Yeah.
And I think the only thing that I was thinking about it is we know Liverpool aren't flush with money because of the circumstances at this moment in time. We know Barcelona may need to make a fire sale. Now, there's all other, I'm throwing his name out there, but you've got to think about his wages as well. It'd probably be a non-starter just off the back of that. Then you look at the other side. Would he be, keen to right the wrongs of leaving? I'm sure it's probably maybe a regret of his. But if it's not Coutinho, and it probably isn't, let's be honest, it has to be someone within that profile, the same, who can operate both in the midfield three or in the front three. And that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, definitely. Again, it's a very fair shout. And we all know as Liverpool fans the quality he does possess on his day. Like, I thought he was outstanding for us. It's just obviously ever since he left, various reasons, it just hasn't worked out for him. Taryn, do you agree with Mark, not only on Coutinho in that role, but the other positions we might need to fill before the window closes?
See, I think for me, the midfield sort of slots are a bit difficult to buy for, I guess. You've got Henderson in there, you've got Fabinho in there, you got Thiago in there. I feel like Thiago towards the end of the season was doing bits maybe of what we sort of want. And I think the problem we have is Coutinho was unplayable on his day. The dynamic he brought to that midfield was, unparalleled. And I think now we look at clubs like, Mark was saying, City and Man United, and they've got players like that in that midfield. But they lack what Liverpool lack in terms of defensive, solidity and sort of the pressing and the workhorses, I guess. And I think we've got players in our arsenal, I guess. I'm trying to think of it of sort of Klopp's thinking. And I think he's looked at Naby Keita and he's looked at Thiago and thought, we've got players there. Like we were talking about Elliot as well. We've got players in our club that can do that job for us, and he's going to give him a chance. And I think he won't venture out in the market for a sort of attacking player. I think if he is going to get anyone, he might get a sort of box-to-box player. And I think looking at Inter Milan's situation, they're struggling for money. They're struggling in terms of, a lot of things retaining players. Maybe Barella is a player that we can look to get. There's also this half-decent striker who plays for PSG, who, he's a bit of a luxury player, but, there's never been a greater time to get somebody who's got one foot out the door. It's one of those things where if we had the money and everything was, fine and dandy, you'd be so excited to sort of push for him. But I know that financially it might not be there, but he's a player that doesn't come round often. He doesn't come round available often. And you'd like to think that maybe, there's something in the bank. Michael Edwards' masterclass can get him over the line, promise him a Twix or something to get him to Liverpool. But, I think for me, there's not really much you can do with the team this season. I think it's a bit too late in the window, I guess, for big sort of changes. And I think Klopp will ultimately just trust the players he's got in his squad. And hopefully that will get us through the season.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be an element of trusting what he's had. I think he alluded to that tonight himself, in the fact that he's quite happy with the squad, but they will assess the market, which is very similar to the line he gave last summer before we signed Diogo Jota. And I think we might see something similar, to be honest. And I think that's probably what we need. I think a backup option to the front three, another one in the mould of Jota, because, again, we spoke about Origi numerous times and before we came on. And for me, everything he's done for the club, come for big moments, it's just not the level we need anymore. We spoke about the Liverpool level in terms of Nat Phillips. And for me, Origi falls into the same category as not quite being at the Liverpool level. So for me, him out, someone else in a similar but better mould, hopefully. And I think the big glaring one for me is we spoke about Robertson briefly and playing a lot last year. Gini Wijnaldum played 51 games last year for Liverpool. Like, as much as we talk about probably the perfect midfield with Henderson, Thiago, Fabinho, for whatever reason, those three didn't play a lot last year together. So we've lost a player in Wijnaldum who played 51 times. If we don't replace that with someone of a similar quality and durability, and we just look at Keita and Oxlade-Chamberlain, I think we're going to have a problem somewhere down the line, personally. But yeah, I'll let you come in on Mark on that, and any thoughts on the Wijnaldum replacement before we move on.
Yeah, so I think first of all, he was a fantastic player for Liverpool, wasn't he? You know, people talk about his durability, but his ball retention under pressure, his ability to balance off the midfield out of possession as well. Such an intelligent player to cover gaps, and he's been brilliant for Liverpool. Yeah, I think personally, I think Klopp will believe that I think he'll try and cover it with the personnel in his squad rather than buying a player. I do believe that he will think it's now or never for the likes of your Keita. Curtis Jones is obviously a player who I really like. Curtis Jones, I think he did fantastically last season, and has a lot of the qualities actually that Wijnaldum has. I think his ball retention is excellent. I think he can progress the ball in terms of travelling with the ball. I actually think he's got a lot more to offer than he's shown as well in the final third. Oxlade-Chamberlain is another player, of course. You know, we talk about he's been trialled in the front three, but he's not a player for me who plays in the highest line of the pitch. I feel he's a player who needs to see the game in front of him, burst into space, drive forward with the ball. So there's plenty of options. I mean, we've just talked about Harvey Elliott as being another one. And I do believe he'll try and cover it with the personnel. But that's why I feel that rather than replacing Wijnaldum with sort of a similar kind of player, I believe that's why I'd get that sort of hybrid of a player who can play in the forward line and a midfield player. Because then if you're buying a player of that quality, of that level, they can operate in both positions. And like we talk about getting another backup sort of player to come in and sort of behind Jota, it's very difficult to find the sort of quality who'd be happy to come in that role, if that makes sense. Like, if you think about it, Origi is almost the ideal candidate. You know, he's been a footballer who's been able to come in and make an impact. I think if you are targeting somebody, it has to be the hybrid of a player, and therefore they're a top-level player, and then you'd either play them in the forward line or the midfield, and they're strengthening your team and making it a better team rather than someone to come in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and it's a really interesting point about Origi. When you consider him fifth choice, you know, as fifth choice, he's probably of a decent quality, and he has made an impact. The only thing I'd say to that is, the way I look at it, in maybe a bit of a glorious sense, if we talk about City, our rivals, and their fifth choice for outstanding, I know we can't match that, but when we see Origi have to start a game, I'm thinking about Burnley at home last year, like, he's just not of the quality. And we talk about the African Cup of Nations coming up to start of next year when Salah and Mane are both going to be gone. I don't think we can see Origi start for 2 or 3 weeks. It's just doesn't fill me or anyone with any confidence, I imagine.
Yeah.
I think in regards to that, Dan, I think Origi, I think there's a time in a player's career where you're sort of happy being an impact substitute, aren't you? And you can probably have a positive impact in that role. But I think after a while, he's getting 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there. Difficult to build up any rhythm. The confidence then goes. I don't think he's ever been a perfect fit in terms of Liverpool's system either, because you're then coming in and trying to replace Firmino, and he's not the similar profile. So I think that's sort of worn away. And I would agree that, you know, he is coming to the point where his Liverpool career needs to end. And I think he'll still be a really good Premier League player for another side. But yeah, that's the kind of player I go for. But I understand your point of view, definitely.
Yeah. We will move on. We'll move on to the season more generally. And I suppose just briefly, kind of what our expectations and hopes are. Obviously, we come off the back of a decent end to last season. Finishing third, I think, was about as best we could have hoped for, given what went on during the season. So, Taryn, I'll come to you. Just from a Liverpool perspective, I'm not asking you to tell us if we're going to win the league or not, but are you hopeful, and do you have, positive thoughts going into the season?
I am quite hopeful, to be fair. I think, we've got everybody back. All the key players are back. It's almost like, I guess the fact that we got Champions League as well, we've got aging players, I guess. who don't belong in the Europa League or belong in European football. So the fact we got Champions League is exciting as well, and the fact that they're going to be in it, the likes of Virgil van Dijk, Henderson, all these big players. But at the same time, you look around and you see what's going on sort of around the team, and you think, well, are we going to be able to compete with that? When there's these players that have been putting in performances week out, week in, week out, and we've got players just coming back from injury. So it is a mild concern, I think, as well. Salah and Mane, like you mentioned, going away midway through the season for a month plus. That's quite concerning also. But I think we'll be up there. But I don't see, unless we bring in a good number of depth, maybe a big sort of quality player attacking wise, I can't see us sort of retaining or pushing on to get that title.
Interesting. You mentioned obviously Henderson there. Obviously, a lot of Liverpool's business, just to touch on that, has been renewing contracts, and hopefully Henderson's not far away, because some of the talk this summer has been particularly worrying. But Mark, do you share Taryn's, I suppose, slightly pessimistic view that we might not be able to challenge for the Premier League this season?
Yeah, I think it's difficult. I would expect Manchester City to win the Premier League. I think with Liverpool, I think what people often forget is Liverpool won the league basically twice when you think about the points tally they accumulated. To do that over a period of 2 years, amass the points they did, because they won it in all bar getting the name on the trophy, really, in terms of the points. So the level of performance they had to dig out on a week-to-week basis. And not only that, to accumulate them points, there was a lot of results that Liverpool managed to get over the line, which were nip and tuck. There was a lot of 1-0 games in there. Mm-hmm. And all them variables that Liverpool were managed to overcome. I do believe that players sort of enter a cycle of the prime, and I think with Liverpool, with virtually the same personnel, I do believe it'd be difficult to kind of replicate that. I'm a massive fan of Thiago, who's come in. Obviously, he's been an addition since Liverpool won the league. So I think that is a positive. Obviously, Wijnaldum's gone out. But in terms of, I've always felt that Manchester City had control every variable of the game. I think that the coach is an absolute genius in terms of coaching world-class talent, of which he obviously gets at his disposal and seems to be getting even more this summer. So I think we'll look back at what Klopp achieved in the years and say, I think everyone does anyway, but I think it'll be even more sort of idealistic about how brilliant a job he did on the resources that he did and everything they got right in that period of time. But I do feel they need that injection of that, maybe that one creative player or something that it may be, just to freshen the squad up and take that quality onto another level, because Liverpool have still got fantastic players and they finished third last season after having an absolute nightmare in terms of losing personnel. And obviously Van Dijk will be coming back, which is massive. But I do believe it'll be difficult to replicate what they previously did them 2 seasons, not just because of the opposition, but I feel like the natural cycle of a team's peak may have just gone beyond that point for Liverpool with the personnel they currently have.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with any of those points. I'm slightly more, I suppose, optimistic that we will push City, and I think it will be City. As good as Chelsea were the back end of last season, I'm not sure that'll replicate itself this season with them. I think they'll be stronger, but I'm not sure they'll really challenge for the title. I could be wrong. The reason I'm positive, I suppose, is for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, Mark. Jurgen Klopp is about 90% of the reason I'm positive, because of just how good I believe that man is. The extra percentages probably come from the belief that I think we will sign a couple. I find it really difficult to think that we'll see out this transfer window without doing any more business. And I think the injection of just a couple of well-placed players to improve this squad will be enough. Because I think you look at the players that have come back, we spoke about Van Dijk and Matip and Gomez. And I think, like I say, Mane looks sharper, Salah looks as sharp as ever. I think all that will culminate, hopefully, in a bit of a comeback season for Liverpool, as well as Van Dijk and etc. But that is wishful thinking. And as people will allude to and people will know, I am ever the optimist. So, yeah, hopefully. But I think more generally, having fans back inside stadiums is going to be a big thing this season. I think I and most other Liverpool fans are hopefully looking forward to a good season. So we will move on to Liverpool's opening match, obviously next Saturday night, Norwich away, which it always seems to be whenever Norwich are in the Premier League, we always seem to have Norwich first game in some capacity. I know when we won the league, we had them at Anfield on a Friday night, so hopefully this is a good omen to go again. I'll get some thoughts on the game, Mark, generally. Obviously, newly promoted side can be quite dangerous. They like to play football, Norwich, generally. That's how they've got promoted. That's how they were in the Premier League last time. Do you think that suits Liverpool? And do you see us being dominant, I suppose?
I think the style of play definitely suits Liverpool, Dan, in terms of the way they'd like to play. I think Liverpool find it much more difficult when the opposition escape that sort of first line of pressure, especially the lesser side. So I think that's a positive for Liverpool. One thing I would say is you never want to play newly promoted teams as your opening game, never mind away from home. They have that confidence of obviously the coming in as a winning team, a successful team from the previous season. And it's only really, I think, when they take them sort of knocks in the opening early weeks of the season or after a prolonged period of time that they lose that bit of confidence and become much easier to play against. Obviously, the fan base will be up for it. The players will be up for it. But more than that, they'll come in with that sense of confidence and belief in what they're doing from the previous season. So never the best. Listen, you could get a lot more. You could have been playing one of the top 6 sides. However, it just, for me, is one you sort of want to avoid a newly promoted side away from home on the opening day. Having said that, Liverpool should be going to Norwich and winning the game. There's no question about that if they've got any aspirations this season. So,
yeah, 100%. Taryn, do you share those thoughts? Do you think Norwich, the style of football, it suited us previously, certainly suited Luis Suarez back in the day. But do you foresee a relatively footballing-wise straightforward afternoon for the Reds?
Yeah, I think it'd be a good little run out, to be fair. No disrespect to Norwich, but I think it's the sort of game that the players need. I imagine Norwich will, we saw them, they came out the blocks quite fast when we played them, the few seasons ago when they were here. They really took the game to us and it was an exciting encounter. But I feel like if they do sit back, it'd be a great exercise for us to sort of work on breaking down that low block, which I think is, our biggest weakness. It is difficult to play against that. But I think, if we can sort of have a bit more practice in that early doors in the Premier League, I think it'll bode well for the rest of the season. So, yeah, I think it'll be a good game to start off with. And, like Mark was saying, we've got to be winning it if we won't have any hopes of, getting the title at the end of the season.
Yeah, I think getting off to a good start is as important as actually beating Norwich away, if that makes sense. Obviously, you'd expect us to beat Norwich both times, home and away. But if we, on the back of last season and what went on, if we have genuine title hopes, I think confident start, potentially getting some goals under our belt first game would be really nice. Just on the game, before we wrap up with some predictions, obviously we spoke about, I suppose, systems Klopp's been utilising and players he's been looking at. Probably not expecting Jordan Henderson to be involved, given he's not really trained. So, given what we know so far, Mark, what would you expect the team to be next Saturday? Go through it 1 to 11 if you want, but any particular people you want to see starting or think have deserved a start?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. Obviously, Alisson, the goalkeeper, will start, and then you've got Alexander-Arnold. Matip will play. I believe that Matip will play. I think the other centre-back position is really interesting because I think he'd want to get Van Dijk in the team without a shadow of a doubt as soon as he can. Mm-hmm. I think it's difficult to sort of gauge where Van Dijk is because I know he's been playing in what you'd consider the starting 11, I believe, in the last 2 fixtures. Yeah. However, is that a consequence that he doesn't want Gomez and Van Dijk both in the same side for a period of time during the games? And I think you'd have to factor that in. So if he believes that Liverpool are going to have a lot of the ball and he's going to have a relatively comfortable day, then I feel that if he can, he'll try and get Van Dijk in the side. Obviously, Simicas will be playing at left back now. I believe Fabinho will play in the holding role. I know he's came back. However, Liverpool don't have a specialist in that position. Milner never plays as a single defensive midfield playing in a free, so I can't see that happening. I know he has in pre-season, but I think that's a different sort of environment. So I think Fabinho will play. Keita will play. I believe that. I think he'll want to get him off to a decent start. And then Milner will play as one of the 2-8s with Keita, I'd imagine. Mm-hmm. And then you've obviously got the Salah, Mane, and I always think Firmino plays if he's fit, but maybe Jota. Maybe he'll go for Jota in the opening fixture. But I always think that lessens Liverpool as a team. I don't think he's ideally suited to play in that central area and is not a like-for-like replacement. So I think the centre-forward position, he may go for Jota just on the basis that Firmino has came back late. But that's what I expect the side to be anyway.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think the Firmino one's a really interesting point. Obviously, he's only really come back this week. So it's a relatively straightforward decision for Klopp in terms of he hasn't got to do a lot of explaining. He could just say, Jota's been with us longer in terms of this pre-season. He starts. And listen, who knows? He gets off to a flyer, gets a couple of goals. Get that shirt off him, Bobby Firmino, as good as you are. Taryn, do you agree with a lot of what Mark said there? The centre-back situation's really interesting. Van Dijk started and played 70 minutes today, which to me is a lot closer than I expected him to be before Norwich. I think the talk earlier on was he won't be ready for this first game, but 70 minutes in a pre-season is pretty close.
Yeah, definitely. I think you could tell it was a big task for him. He came off. Normally, we see Virgil sort of strolling off like it was nothing, that he'd just gone for a walk in the park. But I think he looked a bit more drained, I guess. Not extremely, but I think he looked a bit more sort of worn out. But I think, 70 minutes is such a good sort of run out pre-season, especially with the injuries that he's had. Yeah. I think it would be interesting. I don't know if Konate plays tomorrow, if Klopp goes, that Matip and Konate start. You don't know. But I think, Virgil's able to play for a prolonged period of time in the game, then, he's got to be in there. I agree with Mark as well. I think midfield will definitely be Fabinho, Keita and Milner. And I think if Keita's in the side, I don't really see the sort of desperate need for Firmino in there. I think that Keita's going to be a lot more advanced in that midfield. It sort of plugs that gap, I guess, that sort of Firmino would occupy. I think Jota, for me, he's what we need. He gets in the box. He sort of plays on defenders, and, we like to cross quite a bit into the box. Trent's sort of favourite thing is to whip it into the box. And, for me, Jota's one of the only players in that squad that likes to get in there, and he knows where to be in the box. So I think especially against Norwich, you're going to need maybe a bit of a nuisance in the box as well, as opposed to, Firmino likes to drag defenders out. But, at the end of the day, it's Bobby Firmino. He's the Liverpool system, sort of in a player. So I guess it all depends on Klopp at the end of the day. But yeah, I think the prediction that Mark came up with is pretty close to what we'll see on the opening game.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. On the topic of predictions, it's just time to get your predictions for next Saturday night. Taryn, I'll come straight back to you.
Well, I think we're a solid 1-1, to be honest with you.
I was waiting for that.
No, I think it could be a 3-0, to be honest. I think we'll get a good start and get a good few goals in there. I can't really see Norwich causing too much of a problem, maybe early doors. I think they might need a bit more time. They've had quite a long period of time off as well, with the Championship finishing much earlier than everybody else. So I think with that, Liverpool will be sort of firing on all cylinders, I guess. Yeah,
well, let's hope so. Mark, prediction from you?
Yeah, I always think it's difficult these days because obviously you don't watch Norwich last season, so it's a difficult one to gauge. But just in terms of Liverpool, you'd like to think that they could come through the game. I don't think it'd be straightforward. I don't think it's an ideal game for them. However, if they were to win the game 2-0 or 2-1, I think Liverpool would be delighted.
Yeah, agree. And you're dead right with Norwich because, to be fair to them, after getting pretty much, not humiliated, but humbled probably in the Premier League a year ago, and they got promoted really quite impressively. So they will be full of confidence. They've probably lost the best player in Emi Buendia, gone to Aston Villa, big blow for them. And yeah, for all the reasons we spoke about, Liverpool's need for a good start, I'd probably say 2-0 as well. Nice and comfortable. Get away from East Anglia with 3 points and go again. But yeah, that is all we've got time for the Shankly Gates podcast. We'll be back next Sunday to see whose prediction was right and look ahead for the rest of the season. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you again.
Thanks.